Hi everyone, thank you very much for having me in this pre-recorded presentation. I would be delighted to join you in London for the International Conference on Multimodality, but unfortunately I'm unable to travel. So this presentation has the title of Multimedia Learning and Multimodality. What is there to know about deaf and hard of hearing education? As you already have understood, this is a study that was carried in Portugal. I'm Portuguese, and with a multi-research team and focused on deaf students, in this case, adult students, during the pandemic of COVID-19. You can find more about this study in the published article in the scientific reports of the Nature journal, and the title of the article is this. It's an open access article, so you can check on e-learning is a burden for the deaf and hard of hearing, and these are the names of the team of the researchers here in Portugal. So we assumed in one of our previous studies, we were focused on the neuromyths about learning, and one of our prevalent myths here in Portugal, and I think all around the world, is the learning styles neuromyth. And we are beginning to look at it in a very responsible way, because as teachers, and I work in an institution that is that has teacher training, and we are looking at our curriculum and see where these neuromyths are present and why they are still present. So this study comes from another one that says that the deaf have specific learning style, that is the visual learning style. So during COVID, this was a time that was particularly hard for the deaf and hard of hearing, because that neuromyths really shaped the methods and the approaches that educators and teachers designed for their online classes. So what we want to search is at the extent of the level of fatigue, that assuming that the deaf have a specific learning style, and that is the visual learning style, how can that lead to levels of fatigue after, for example, one class or one day of classes on online modalities during COVID and pandemic? So for us, it was a significant concern, because that kind of fatigue has been already been studied, and in the pre-COVID era, that was already an evidence. So we want to know at what extent it could really be causing a problem. So giving the positive highlight and demands of distance learning on deaf and hard of hearing students, we wanted to investigate how an online environment might differently affect deaf and hard of hearing participants, comparing them with a group of hearing participants. The novel data, we thought that the novel data could contribute to the discussion concerning the pros and the cons of digital migration. So digital migration is not something innovative. It's not something new, but this change for this sudden change for digital environments was very fast and very sudden. So we think that this migration could be, these results could be helping redesigning more accessible and equitable multimodal approaches, especially within the deaf and hard of hearing education field. So we thought we could contribute to supporting policymakers in redefining optimal learning strategies. So as I said a minute ago, it has already been shown that the high levels of daily effort may result in mental fatigue in the DHH population, with associated reduced ability to concentrate or to perform any cognitive task, with this variable, that is, when particularly there are potentially interfering distractors present. So when we have different semiotic inputs, or different inputs of different natures. These are some of the authors. Some are focusing on mental fatigue associated with listening effort. Some are working on mental fatigue and the capacity of visual attention. Some are, this is the first of our, this Rodriguez FEM. It's our first article, and it's about neuro myths and how they can affect deaf students. And some of them are just using experimental studies relating mental fatigue and attention. So as we witnessed, this digital migration was very speeding up at a certain point when we all went home and had our classes online. So we really didn't thought of it with the necessary impact, or analyzing the necessary impact. So we had a very short time to adapt to distance learning scenarios, and suddenly started to redesign multimodal resources, especially for the DHH population, because the things that were happening in school were almost a one-to-one relation from the teacher to the deaf student. So suddenly we had to build all of these resources and enable that could prevent them for being for having this gap that we already studied, this academic gap towards the hearing students there. So the gap exists, and it's going further and forward and deeper as they grow older. So the gap started to be noticeable at the elementary, but after that and until high school, the gap is always getting deeper and deeper. So we are very concerned, and especially in this COVID, with the increase of this gap. So we chose for this study, this was an experimental type of design that was an ecological ex post facto. So we studied something that was pre-recorded as an online class and presented to several participants. And so we call it ecological because it was the most similar thing that we could think on having a conference, a lecture, a class online for deaf students, for deaf people in general. So we had three groups, a group of deaf and hard of hearing participants, and they all had to be proficient in sign language. So that was the condition. We had a group of hearing participants, but they were proficient in sign language also, especially interpreters of sign language. So we were searching for interpreters of sign language. So, and a control group of hearing participants, they were unfamiliar with sign language. Okay, this third group was our control group. So the sign language was the thing that basically was different on this control group. This is our chronological research line, our timeline. So the environment was all a virtual and online methodology, and it started with the TO, it's like the 0 point, that was a visual literacy test. Why a visual literacy test? Because the online class was all about artworks and artists. It was an art class. So we needed to know how close or how far participants were from each other on this pre-knowledge of art, in this case, visual art. So they did this test whenever they said they were available to be a participant, and after getting all the e-consents and everything that the ethics committee said to us, they were filling this 10 multiple choice question about art. So what is this technique? Showing a picture. What is this technique? Do you know this artist? How familiar are you with surrealism? Okay, and several other questions. And at the same time, we gave them a FAS. A FAS is a fatigue scale. That it is a validated scale for assessing fatigue. And this is also a 10-item scale, and it's a self-perceived fatigue. So it asks physically, I feel exhausted, or I have trouble thinking with clarity, or fatigue bores me. That's the kind of questions that you find in a FAS. There is versions of FAS for almost every language. So we ask permission to use the Portuguese version of FAS. So after that, the participants had a link where they could be at our online class about art and artists. And that class was about 35 minutes long, and they had to grasp the information presented displayed at their computer. And after that, immediately after that, they had to complete a VAS. A VAS, I will show you later. It's a bar, horizontal bar, that you can slide with your mouse from your computer from 0 to 10, and saying not fatigued at all or extreme fatigue, situating not in numbers, but graphically in a line, an horizontal line. But this is very useful. We found this for the first use this for the first time. It was very useful. And after that, they had a kind of an exam, that is, you have now to answer this test that will ask you details about what information you were able to memorize through that online class. So this, we call it performance test. It was all about, it had questions related to all the information that was passed in the online class. They were scored, and at the end, from 0 to 100, they gave a score for each participant. So this combination of instruments and techniques, we had visual art literacy test, the fatigue assessment scale, the videographic stimuli, the online class, and the visual analog scale, VAS. We aim to investigate how an e-learning environment, such as online class, might differently affect the participant group on these studies, with focus on fatigue and also in performance. So in school environments, we thought it would be useful to learn about fatigue and how fatigue could affect performance, or in this case, academic performance. The use of sign language was an important factor selecting these participants, due to the multimodal and bilingual nature of the instructional material used on this online class. So this is this is a video. I will try to show you how this works. I hope you can see this. So we had the painter, and we had this kind of this verbal written information below. We call it oracles. We had the window for the interpreter, and we had the teacher. So at home, they were having access to all of this information. This different picture, this semiotic kinds of information that we have. So we have the visual and the verbal, and they don't have the auditory, but it exists. It is there, but they don't have access. So, as you see, is as they have seen, and the control group had access to my voice as well. I thought it would appear, but no. So the difference is the deaf perceive it like this, and the second group and the control group would be hearing my voice speaking. Okay. So there were 4 artworks, and they were chosen to be more related to spatial relationships, like this first one, with depth, with perspective, with forms, with structure. The other one more with about color, proximity, more far away, more close. And one is more about abstract, but in a geometrical form, and it kind of leads you in a sequence of forms that are changing. So in the left, in the right is an artist. They are all Portuguese, by the way. There is a gestualistic artists. They were all chosen by their characteristics, pictorial characteristics and formal characteristics. So let's go to the VAS. The VAS I was telling you. This is an instrument that indicates from the perspective of the participant their subjective perception of fatigue. And we wanted to know how in 2 dimensions. So we wanted to know if they were mentally fatigued and physically fatigued. This was immediately after the online class. So they had to say from not at all tired to extremely tired. This is a very interesting instrument. So let's go to the results. We don't have much time. So the visual art literacy test, so the pre stimuli, and we have this divided in the pre-stimuli and the post-stimuli. The pre-stimuli was the visual art test and the FAS. So there was no great difference in SPSS program that's in between the 3 groups. So all of them, all of the deaf, all of the hearing with Portuguese sign language, and the hearing with no sign language, there was no significant differences between the 3 groups. The FAS, there was a slightly difference within the FAS. So the deaf were already a little bit more fatigued because the FAS use daily fatigue, not immediate fatigue like the slide bar. This is a questionnaire that leads you into a daily routine felt fatigue in several contexts, several moments of the day, of the week, of the month. So they were already a little bit more fatigued than the other 2 groups. The slide bar said a totally different thing. So the slide bar says, and this is post-stimuli, let me remind of you that this was right after the task that we called the videographic stimuli. The deaf had the higher post-task fatigue scores and very different from the control group. Not as different as the hearing that use sign language, but very distant from the control group, that is the hearing participants. They were at the almost the maximum values for mental and physical fatigue, and they were matching the both. So when they said from 0 to 100, I'm 90% fatigue in mental dimension, they were always physically fatigued in the same number, in the same percentage. In what relates to the multiple choice performance test, and we associate this with academic performance because this relates with attention and memory and recalling ability. So the lower results were for the deaf. This multiple choice performance test had no time limit. They could be doing this for 1 hour, 2 hours, but at the end, they didn't have, they were the worst at their performance level, responding to questions about the information conveyed in the online class. So we think that if optimal multimodal approaches used in the classroom, used to direct and maintain visual and attention, were used, perhaps we could prevent deaf students from visual attention strays and keep the connection to the delivered information that otherwise continuously increasing potential mental and physical fatigue. So again, the differences are significantly bigger when comparing the non-Portuguese Sign Language users. Diverging from the questionnaire about fatigue results, diverging from that, the Portuguese Sign Language is a variable that seems to have contributed and increased both mental and physical fatigue in the hearing group. Previous literature shows that individuals have a limited processing capacity and must select pertinent information from the multitude of available sensory input. So this particular problem was about having all that stimuli simultaneously. There was no chaining as we do it in physical classes. It was simultaneous. So that chaining criteria wasn't used. The limitation is evidenced by the attention processing mechanisms such as divided attention, as it relates to the optimal allocation of resources between different sets of input and splitting or rapid shifting of the attentional focus, giving the inability to process stimuli in one or several sensory modalities in parallel. This process becomes more difficult when the quantity and the complexity of the component tasks, suggesting that dividing attention between simultaneous stimuli intensifies and recruits additional neurocognitive resources and may lead to limitations on attention span and cognitive load management. Also, a new thing, bilingual, bimodal individuals might have experienced here the processing of code blending stimuli, speech and sign simultaneously. Remember that two groups were hearing and one was paying attention to Portuguese Sign Language also. So which is analogous to a cognitive demanding sociolinguistic code switching in communication. That is, it's harder to suppress a second language when that language uses a different modality. Individuals with Portuguese Sign Language may have tried to suppress sign language to pay attention to the oral language, or the opposite, trying to complete suppression of the non-selected language, as thus experiencing higher levels of fatigue. A very innovative dimension of our study is an emphasis on the situation of the hearing participants using sign language interpreters. So we showed that for slightly non-significant lower levels of daily fatigue, so the interpreters were not having previous higher daily fatigue comparing with the deaf, but similar fatigue levels were obtained at the post-task compared to the deaf, as well as lower performance scores at the performance test. So it is possible that this group might felt a similar cognitive overload and a subsequent fatigue sensation due to the limitations of the divided attentional mechanism. That is, as they are sign language users and fluent in the dimension of oral Portuguese simultaneously, the integration of information through simultaneous multimodal challenges made it difficult to grasp contents of the online class. So it should be noticed that the relationship in literature, it already exists between stress and burnout in sign language interpreters. So this professional class has already literature that supports that they are fragile in this dimension of stress and burnout. It is called emotional exhaustion, dispersonalization, personal accomplishment, but never it was mentioned that it could be because of this particular dimension of overload, stimuli, and difficult to grasp contents of different semiotical natures. So overall, and to finish, the results indicates levels of mental and physical fatigue consistent with research in the field of deafness and cognitive load, and consequent constraints on the maintenance of attentional mechanisms. And this went more severe. This accomplished more severe dimensions than previously to the pandemic. Together, our results seems to show that when the deaf are asked to visualize the multimedia stimulus in the format that presented in our research, there is a combination of factors that negatively affect both the apprehension of the conveyed information and simultaneously to an increase of mental and physical fatigue. In the line of our previous research, our study sheds light into the attentional split mechanism affecting hearing participants who use Portuguese Sign Language, bimodal and bilingual, but that does not seem to interfere with Portuguese Sign Language non-user on post-task fatigue rates or performance scores. Thank you very much for your time and have a wonderful conference. Thank you.